Obamacare and the HHS mandate. President Trump promised the days were numbered for the mandate requiring employers to cover birth control. But what happens now, since the Affordable Care Act remains on the books? Catholic church shooting. Nearly a dozen people are dead after an attack in southeastern Nigeria. North Korea revenge. The country's leader is speaking out after the UN slaps the communist nation with new sanctions. And a change for the Knights of Columbus. A new uniform is unveiled for the Catholic organization. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 7th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. It's been nearly 3 months since President Trump promised the Little Sisters of the Poor that their long ordeal with the contraceptive mandate was over. The president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is asking the president why the mandate is still on the books. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The contraceptive mandate is part of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. It forces faith-based employers, including religious nonprofits like EWTN, to cover birth control, abortion-inducing drugs, and sterilization. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo is asking the president to follow through on his promise to lift the mandate.
President Trump vowed in May that the mandate's days were numbered.
We are ending the attacks on your religious liberty, and we are proudly reaffirming America's leadership role as a nation that protects religious freedom for everyone.
Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, Archbishop of Galveston, Houston, was in the Rose Garden that day. Now, in an op-ed for The Hill, DiNardo is urging the president to make good on his promise. Cardinal DiNardo says the HHS mandate puts an unnecessary burden on religious freedom, a burden that the administration has the power to lift, a burden that the administration has promised to lift, and yet the burden has not been lifted. Mr. President, please lift this burden. The attorneys who represented the Little Sisters of the Poor in their landmark case against the HHS mandate before the Supreme Court echoed that plea.
We've heard the president say that this mandate was wrong and should be over. We've heard the vice president say the same thing. We've heard the secretary of HHS say it. And so it's time for the government's lawyers to get on board, admit this mandate was wrong, and wrap up these cases once and for all.
With Congress on its summer recess and the president on a working vacation, nothing is likely to happen anytime soon. Yet the administration says it is committed to getting rid of Obamacare, which contains the mandate forcing employers to cover birth control and abortion-inducing drugs.
This ain't over by a long shot. And President Trump are absolutely committed to keep our promise to the American people. We were not elected to save Obamacare. We were elected to repeal and replace it.
A White House spokesperson tells me that the administration is working on revising the mandate. I'm told the president remains committed to protecting religious liberty, but the White House says these things take time to do it right. Wyatt?
Mark, President Trump is on a working vacation in Bedminster, New Jersey. What's on his agenda?
The president says he's working hard in New Jersey as the White House goes through renovations. A White House spokesperson says the president will be meeting with top aides on issues like health care and tax reform. And next week, the president says he'll be in New York for meetings.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thanks, Mark. Pro-life investigative journalist David Daleiden and his group, the Center for Medical Progress, file a petition with the Supreme Court appealing a gag order issued by a judge in San Francisco. The judge stopped Daleiden from releasing more undercover footage of Planned Parenthood. The petition argues no federal court has ever upheld such an order. Daleiden says the move is an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment. Vice President Mike Pence is blasting a report he may run for president in 2020. The New York Times says Pence would run in 2020 if President Trump did not seek re-election. The Times quoted multiple advisors. The vice president issued a statement saying the article offended him, his family, and his entire team, adding he's committed to advancing the president's agenda and see Trump re-elected in 2020. The FBI is now investigating after someone apparently threw a bomb through the window of a mosque outside Minneapolis.
An attack on a mosque is an attack on a synagogue, is an attack on a church.
We have been doing a lot of interfaith dialogue work, and now I think we need more faith in action.
It happened Saturday as people were preparing for their morning prayers. The device damaged the imam's office inside the mosque, but didn't hurt anyone. Worshippers managed to extinguish the blaze before firefighters arrived. At least 11 people are dead after gunmen opened fire on a Catholic church in southeastern Nigeria. The attack happened at St. Philip Catholic Church in the Nui Diocese, where gunmen stormed the church. No group has claimed responsibility, but authorities do not believe Boko Haram was behind the attack. Pope Francis says he's deeply saddened by the tragedy and extended his heartfelt condolences. North Korea vows a 1,000-fold revenge against the United States. This comes after the United Nations slaps the communist nations with new sanctions, trying to starve the country's nuclear missile program. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us tonight with the latest. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump calls it the largest sanctions package ever leveled against North Korea. American Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is leaving the door open to negotiate with the rogue nation, but the North is slamming that door shut tonight.
This is the reason why world leaders are scrambling. Analysts say these North Korean missiles could reach the U.S. mainland, including cities as far away as Los Angeles and Chicago. To stop that threat, the United Nations Security Council unanimously passes new sanctions.
This is the most stringent set of sanctions on any country in a generation. These sanctions will cut deep, and in doing so will give the North Korean leadership a taste of the deprivation they have chosen to inflict on the North Korean people.
The UN sanctions could cost North Korea $1 billion, a third of their annual exports. Even though China is North Korea's biggest trading partner, they still agreed to the new sanctions, along with Russia. That's a victory for President Trump. But North Korea isn't backing down. North Koreans blame the United States for the new UN sanctions. This man says the sanctions make them more determined to build up their nuclear arsenal, something the North says it will never put on the negotiating table. But American Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says if the communist country wants to cut a deal, they must stop testing missiles.
And we hope, again, that this ultimately will result in North Korea coming to the conclusion to choose a different pathway, and when the conditions are right, that we can sit and have a dialogue.
Now that the sanctions are approved, American leaders are rushing to make sure they're carried out. Wyatt?
Jason, what if the sanctions don't stop North Korea?
In that case, the United States has a warning. U.S.'s ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, says it's up to North Korea's regime whether the United States considers military action.
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting tonight. Thanks, Jason. A 19-year-old man tries to attack soldiers at the Eiffel Tower. He's now undergoing a psychiatric exam to help determine whether he's fit for prosecution on terrorism charges. Police say the man shouted "God is great" in Arabic while brandishing a knife. Saturday's attempt was the latest in a series of attempted attacks in France over the past year. A Kenya government official says suspected extremists blew up an electricity tower, creating a blackout on the eve of national elections. The Somali rebels Al-Shabaab have vowed retribution on Kenya for sending troops to Somalia to fight the militants. Kenya will hold general elections tomorrow for the presidency and more than 1,800 elected officials. Jordan's king makes a rare visit to the West Bank. King Abdullah II met with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas during the stop. The visit is seen as a signal to Israel that the king is closely ranking with the Palestinians on key issues, such as the contested Jerusalem shrine. Pope Francis says summer can be a time to encounter the Lord.
L'odierna pagina evangelica.
During his Sunday Angelus address, the Holy Father said summertime could be a providential moment to grow in our commitment to seek and encounter the Lord. To speak to us about summer and spirituality is California native Father Ezra Sullivan, theology professor at Rome's Angelicum University. So, Father, yesterday Pope Francis said Catholics can and should use the summer to grow spiritually. As a spiritual director and theologian, why is this significant, do you think?
Well, it's significant because we never take a vacation from God. He's always with us, and we should always be with Him wherever we go, whether we're home or on vacation.
How do you think families specifically can use vacation as a period to grow in their faith?
Well, for one thing, when people go on vacation, they have the opportunity to visit different parishes and to experience the parish life wherever they're going. So they can see how do Catholics live the Catholic life in these different locations. And also it's the opportunity, since they have more time together, to pray with each other as a family. And so maybe they're prayers they've wanted to pray for a long time, and now this is their opportunity perhaps to take up a portion of the rosary or just to have some quiet time with each other and God.
Well, that can be a challenge, especially in today's world, Father, with all of the distractions. How do you think, what advice do you give people to overcome that and to concentrate on prayer?
Well, the first thing to do is to disconnect, to spend FaceTime with the people, not with the computer, and to say, I want to spend time with my family. This is an opportunity to truly be with them. And when you go to a church on your vacation, then you put all the technology aside, and this is your opportunity to be quiet with God.
The Pope said to turn and entrust vacations to Mary specifically, but he also went on to discuss those who couldn't go away for health, financial, other reasons. What did he say about them?
Well, I think that one thing we have to recognize is that sacred scripture doesn't indicate that Christ or the Blessed Virgin Mary ever took a vacation. But we do know that they spent time every single week with God on the day of rest, which is Sunday. And, well, this is for us as Catholics on Sunday. And so we can remind ourselves that interiorly we need this rest, and we ask the Blessed Virgin Mary to be with us, just as she was always with God. So she can remind us to be with Him wherever we go, and to interiorly unite ourselves through recollection with our Lord.
Such an important message, especially in this day and age, that God is always with us. Father Ezra Sullivan, theology professor at Rome's Angelicum University, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you. God bless you.
Coming up, Beulah's Place.
So we rescue them and help them get back on their feet.
We'll speak to one woman who is helping those in need, inspired by her own experiences. Plus, remembering the Archbishop Emeritus of Milan, Cardinal Dionigi Tettamanzi, a leading voice in the Italian Church, has died. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Advocates against human trafficking here in the United States are shining the spotlight on the nation's homeless crisis. My next guest founded a shelter for homeless teens in Redmond, Oregon, a town where 1,600 children attending school are homeless. Andy Berger is the founder of Beulah's Place in Redmond, Oregon. She joins us now via Skype. Andy, Beulah's Place is a shelter for homeless teens that have been abused. You yourself were a victim of child abuse at a young age. What inspired you to create this shelter to help teens?
We really felt a need to help people. We didn't know what, but we've always worked with teenagers and we love them. In fact, we get offered a lot of them from parents, but we felt like we needed to help the ones that were on the streets that did not have any connection perhaps. And what we found out, Wyatt, was that a lot of them have been discarded or abandoned by families that either have severe dysfunction, abuse, alcoholism, drugs, maybe they're incarcerated, but honestly, they're people that should be loving these kids and they chose not to. So these are the kids that are at risk from trafficking, criminal predators, other kinds of not great things. And so we rescue them and help them get back on their feet. I came out of a bad background and I didn't have a place to go to.
Sure. You know, you say a lot of teens come to Beulah's Place as victims of drug addiction as well. Can you describe, you'd mentioned in general, but can you describe what many of these homeless teens you are speaking with in Oregon specifically are struggling with?
Mm-hmm. In our area, because we're spread out, they're struggling with lack of resources, lack of consistent shelter. If they are on the street, they sleep in parks and cars and trees, wherever they can find. Our weather system is a little bit hard in the winter, so they really are at risk. And within 48 hours, we know that if a teen is on the street, they're most likely to be introduced to or taken into trafficking, and a lot of them do it out of desperation.
How important do you think faith is in overcoming these kinds of obstacles?
In my life, Wyatt, faith was incredibly important because God met me as a 5-year-old child. That was my first suicide attempt because the abuse, violations, everything was so intense. And back then they wouldn't have called it trafficking, but there wasn't any place to go without bringing the adults that were doing the abuse. So he met me there, met me where I was at, and I promised him I would do whatever he called me to do in my life at that very young age without really knowing the complete picture of who our loving God is. And as I grew up, it was a long ride, 17 years of that. And I grew up thinking, I want to help kids that are already here that maybe don't have anybody they can reach out to or that actually understands what it's like to try and run away, to get away from predators, especially the ones you're related to.
Such a powerful message and an inspirational story as well. Andy Berger, founder of Beulah's Place, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Wyatt. It's been an honor.
The Vatican works with other faith leaders around the world to strengthen Catholic relations with Christian churches. Lauren Ashburn sat down with Cardinal Kirk Koch, the president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, to understand why.
Why is it important for the Catholic Church to work with other religions?
Because we have the high priestly prayer of Jesus in the 17th chapter of the Gospel of John. In this is said that Jesus prayed that all may be one, and when Jesus prays for the unity of the Christians, we must pray too and work for this unity.
What example can you give me of this working, of this concept working?
And I will give two examples. In the section East, we have a great path with the meeting between Pope Francis and the Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill in Havana last year in February.
Unheard of, never happened, 500 years.
Yes, this is a very important path because it's the first time in the history that the Russian Orthodox Patriarch and the Pope has a meeting in the world, and this will be a very beautiful opportunity to deepen the relationship. We have also a beautiful event, the common commemoration of the Reformation in Sweden, presided by Pope Francis on the one hand, and on the other hand by the Bishop Munip Yunan, the president of the Lutheran World Federation. The first time also after 500 years, a common commemoration of the Reformation.
But that means that the Church believes that there is something that we can learn from Lutherans and from Martin Luther. Many people, I think, would have a hard time with that.
Yes, because Martin Luther doesn't want to have a break with the Catholic Church. He wants to renew the Catholic Church, and it was not possible in this time. And on the hand, we have the split between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran tradition. But this was not the desire of Luther. And in this sense, we can today refine the unity between Luther and the Catholic Church. I'm convinced Catholics can learn something from Luther, above all his question of God. But on the other hand, I hope that also Lutherans can learn many things about the Catholic Church today, because the Catholic Church today is not the same as in the time of the Reformation.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for joining us. Cardinal Koch, President of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity.
Thank you so much, and all the best for you.
Our thanks to Lauren and Cardinal Koch for that interview. Pope Francis prays at the tomb of Blessed Pope Paul VI. Yesterday marked the 39th anniversary of his death. Paul VI is buried in the Vatican in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Francis beatified him in 2014. Cardinal Dionigi Tetsamansi, the retired Archbishop of Milan, who was once seen as a strong candidate to become Pope, has died. The Diocese of Milan says the Cardinal died Saturday after deteriorating health. When St. John Paul II died in 2005, many Vatican experts said Tetsamansi had an excellent chance of becoming Pope, but another theologian, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, was elected and became Pope Benedict XVI. Cardinal Tetsamansi was 83 years old. Our news partners have a lot more on the life of the Cardinal, including a message from Pope Francis. You can read more now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, free speech on college campuses. We'll talk to the editor-in-chief of a website exposing bias and abuse on campuses around the country. Plus, new uniforms for the Knights causing a stir on social media. What the Catholic group is saying.
Las artes expresan la belleza de la fe y proclaman el mensaje de la grandeza de la creación de Dios.
Pope Francis announces his prayer intention for August, the arts. The Holy Father says when we admire a work of art, we discover how God speaks to us. He hopes artists may help us discover the beauty of creation. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The state of free speech on college campuses is under the microscope amid protests this past year against conservative speakers at the University of California at Berkeley. In the wake of the controversy, North Carolina has passed a law preventing university administrators from disinviting speakers. Sterling Beard is editor-in-chief of Campus Reform, a watchdog group monitoring the nation's higher education system. The group says it exposes bias and abuse on America's college campuses. So, Sterling, tell us why this North Carolina passing this bill is good for free speech on college campuses.
Well, it's good because the environment on college campuses these days has gotten to the point where it can't handle free speech unless it's enforced by state legislatures, I would say, and by outside forces, because you end up with a situation at UC Berkeley where you have Milo Yiannopoulos, who comes to campus and is practically run out of town on a rail by a mob, an actual honest-to-goodness mob where people are wearing balaclavas and masks and everything else because they don't like what he's saying. They say that he's a dangerous person. They say that they think that he espouses hateful speech, and they want to run him out of town on a rail. His views are literally too dangerous to allow on campus. You end up with the same thing when Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter attempt to speak there, coming up here in a few months. I think that this law by North Carolina is absolutely essential to protect that kind of free speech.
Okay, so we've seen that kind of reaction to those speakers, but what about conservatives themselves on college campuses? Do you feel like they're being censored?
I absolutely think they do. I mean, in addition to Milo, you can even end up with something as like Charles Murray up at Middlebury College up in Vermont, another corner of the country there, where there was another kind of small riot when he went to speak there. A professor actually was injured when she had her hair yanked, and she ended up with her neck in a brace because of it. And Middlebury basically handed out a few slaps on the wrist to these students. Administrators, when students do get, I hate to say rowdy because I feel that almost undersells how violent they can, in fact, get when it comes to these sorts of things. When they don't say, okay, you may dislike what he has to say, but he has the right to say it on this campus. When administrators don't enforce that, I think they only encourage that sort of behavior. They encourage further censorship of ideals with which the students disagree.
There's one other example here, a case where you highlight at Princeton University where students can choose any or every gender identity, and you call that abuse. Explain why you're upset about the situation at Princeton.
Well, for the same reason that we've got this sort of postmodernist idea that gender or race or whatever can be decoupled from reality at this point. So we're talking about Princeton there. That was an update to Tiger Hub, which is the university's interface for students. They can now set their gender identity as man, woman, transgender, or other. That's the same sort of problem that you have with Facebook offering, I think, what is it, over something like 70 or 120 different genders at this point. We have so decoupled sex and gender from reality that you can identify as absolutely anything and it's not an issue. You've got the same issue at Providence College in Rhode Island, where you have a course coming up called Transracial Bodies. Now, if you think the term transracial is inherently ridiculous, look at that Rachel Deloge woman from a few months ago who got roundly ridiculed for having white parents, yet being the head of an NAACP chapter and claiming to be black. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, and like I said, it's concerning for so many of our viewers and so many of people across the country. So we're glad that you are shining the spotlight on the situation. Sterling Beard, editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
The Knights of Columbus announced new uniforms for its fourth-degree members, and it's causing quite a stir on social media. During last week's Supreme Convention, Supreme Knight Carl Anderson unveiled the new outfits. You can see the changes right here. Members on social media voiced their opinions, and they weren't all happy. In a statement, Carl Anderson writes, "We have been testing the new uniform over the past year with key groups of knights, including those brother knights who participate in our annual Warriors to Lords pilgrimage. The feedback we received from these groups has been very positive." In a Facebook post yesterday, the organization says additional information regarding the uniforms will be issued in the next days ahead. We'll keep you posted. And we thank, of course, the Knights for their support of EWTN News Nightly. Finally tonight, President Trump took some time away from his working vacation Saturday to crash a wedding. He dropped by to say hello to several guests at his resort in Bedminster, New Jersey. Some wedding goers ended up taking selfies with the president, who was wearing his Make America Great Again hat. The president popped up at another wedding in June, where he posed for pictures with the bride and groom. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back again tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.